the Rockets, it's been reported that the Rockets are prepared to have a fire sale for their players. And the two guys that come in mind, that, pop up in our minds are Victor Oladipo and PJ Tucker. Because every contending team needs a player like Tucker, and teams that are trying to make that playoff push and get further want a player like Oladipo. So where do you think they can potentially land? We'll start with Victor Oladipo.
Starting with Oladipo, I think the most obvious destination for him would be Miami. I think they're still looking for that consistent wing. I don't think Tyler Hero has continued the way the Heat thought he would from the bubble last year, and I think a lot of factors go into that. But if they want to look at making a championship run or even a semi-championship run this year, I think they can use a more dependable wing. Victor Oladipo gives you that, not only scoring the basketball, but defensively, I think he would be a good fit into their system, and I don't think it would take too much. I think you could get it done with some package of like Andre Iguodala, one of those young guys. I would say if you could, Kendrick Nunn, probably one other player and a pick or two. And I don't think that's too much of an asking price for a guy that has said he wants to be in Miami, would more than likely re-sign long-term, and could help you this year in a playoff push.
I have a couple teams for Oladipo. You mentioned one, Miami. I have the Knicks as one, the Dallas Mavericks, the Warriors, the Nuggets. And I was doing some researching. I was on a trade machine. The cap does not work for the Warriors or Nuggets. So that cannot work. Yeah. It's gonna be really hard, difficult for that to work. These are some potential trade packages I have for Oladipo. We have to keep in mind he has a $21 million cap hit. This year he's averaging 20 points per game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and if his efficiency is okay but nothing outstanding. For the Knicks, I think the most likely package is Victor Oladipo to the Knicks for Kevin Knox and Frank Ntilikina and a future pick, maybe a first, maybe a second, whatever it can be. For the Heat, the contracts that can work are Kelly Olynyk, Mo Harkless, and Kendrick Nunn for Oladipo. Do I think they want to give up Olynyk and Nunn? I'm not sure. The Rockets, I think right now, they want some young players and picks. Yeah. Do I think that they want a guy like Olynyk or Mo Harkless who are going to leave next year? The only guy that's really going to be there to stay is Kendrick Nunn. That's the only one. And for the Mavericks, maybe Josh Green or Tyrell Terry and James Johnson for Oladipo. James Johnson makes it work because he has a $16 million cap hit. But if I'm the Rockets, do I want James Johnson back? I'm probably just going to buy him out. Josh Green and Tyrell Terry sound nice, but at this point, I think the best trade package, I may be sounding like a homer, but I think it's Kevin Knox and Frank Ntilikina. The Rockets don't have much young players. We talked about it last episode. They have a few, and there were some Rockets fans in the comments that were pretty upset with the young core because I didn't mention David Nwaba and Sterling Brown. Like, if you're counting those players towards the Rockets' young core, that's a horrible young core.
Yeah, and Knox and Ntilikina, as much as they've had struggles earlier in their career, they would go to Houston, get a chance to play, which they really haven't had that consistent chance in New York. And on top of that, what do you really have to lose? Oladipo's leaving after the season anyway, or at least he has held pretty firm in the stance that he's going to leave Houston after the season. So you might as well go out, get 2 young guys with potential. I don't think that Kendrick Nunn has, worlds better potential than either one of those guys. So putting them together in a package, I think makes more sense. You get the quantity over maybe the quality of one young guy, and then hopefully you could get some picks in that deal and hope the Knicks don't figure it out, which probably isn't a good bet right now because they're trending up, but you never know. So I think that would be a solid move for the Rockets.
It really depends on how far the Knicks want to go with this, because do they really want to get Oladipo, who may be a rental, for a playoff push where you're going to get eliminated in the first round most likely? Because when you look at the Knicks roster, they're good. They're nothing fantastic, but when you bring Oladipo, I think it does make them a lock to make the playoffs. But are the Knicks willing to move off from Dallas's first round pick to get Oladipo and make that playoff push? And that's the thing. And I think if you're getting Oladipo, that means that you're probably thinking of signing him long term. Do you want your core moving forward to be Oladipo and Julius Randle and RJ Barrett? Yeah, I think it sounds pretty good, but I think there's a ceiling to that core.
Yeah.
But, the starting lineup potentially could be Derrick Rose, Oladipo, Barrett, Randle, and Nerlens Noel or Mitchell Robinson. I think that's a pretty damn good lineup, at least for this season, if they could do it.
Yeah, no question. It would be a solid lineup, but I would hit on what you said. That lineup has a ceiling. I would say the best you would ever get out of that lineup would be like those early 2010s Hawks teams, something like that, or those Raptors or Pacers teams where, they were really good teams, but when they ran into the superstars, they always had trouble getting past them. And granted, that's a nice ceiling to have. Anytime you could make a run to, an Eastern Conference Finals is a great season, but I don't know if that's something that you want to invest in, especially when you are the Knicks. And when you're winning, as much as people like to joke about it, when the Knicks are winning, they're a destination. It's the Lakers, the Celtics, and I would say the Knicks are probably the third most famous franchise in all of basketball. So when the wins start piling up, guys will want to go there. And I don't know if it makes as much sense to mortgage a couple of your future assets for a guy like Victor Oladipo, who I think has a ceiling at this point in his career coming off the injuries.
So the next player is PJ Tucker. The Rockets are going to look to trade him. Some teams I have that could be interested are the Denver Nuggets, the Heat, the Lakers, the Nets, the Bucks, the Jazz, and the Sixers. A bunch of contending teams, but his cap hit is $7 million this year. He's only averaging 4 points per game, only about 5 rebounds, a little under 5 rebounds, and he's playing 30 minutes a game and averaging a stat line that I could probably average if I played that much minutes a game. So, and the best part about Tucker right now, we know it's his defense and his ability to hustle, but it's also his three-point shot, and he is shooting 31% from three this season. So one of his greater attributes is not so great this season. So how much is a team willing to really trade for PJ Tucker? Maybe they can get a second-round pick, but I think Tucker has kind of played himself out of being valuable in a trade.
Yeah, and I know I wanted the Nets to be in on him earlier this season. I think getting Blake Griffin kind of makes it a little bit more unrealistic just because he kind of brings you that spark off the bench that I think PJ Tucker could have potentially brought you, and I think PJ Tucker would have been a better defensive option, but now that they have Blake Griffin, I think the only way you see that happen is maybe if Tucker gets bought out, and even then, who knows. The team that I was looking at was the Lakers. I know they're unhappy with the way things have gone down with Marc Gasol. They were expecting more out of him. And although I don't think PJ Tucker is a 5, you bring him in, you can slide him at the 4 and play AD at the 5. I think that would be a solid, player to eat up the minutes that you were expecting to get out of Gasol, or at least lighten the load from Marc Gasol and not have him playing as much as he's playing per night. So although I think his best days are behind him, I do think getting on a playoff team, a championship-level team, would rejuvenate him at least a little bit, like we were talking about with Blake Griffin.
I think the most likely scenario for PJ Tucker is that he gets bought out because there are only a few teams that can actually trade for him and match contracts. Some of those teams are the Heat. They could trade Mo Harkless and KZ Okpala for PJ Tucker and possibly a pick. The 76ers can trade Terrence Ferguson and Tony Bradley for Tucker. I think that makes the most sense. Terrence Ferguson is still a young player. Even though I don't think his ceiling is that high, he's still a young player. And Tony Bradley is a rim protector. And I think that's what the Rockets need off the bench. And the Bucks, DJ Wilson and Pat Connaughton for PJ Tucker. I mean, that's another possibility. But if you're the Bucks, do you want to move off from DJ Wilson for PJ Tucker? It makes it tricky. That's why for me, I think that the most likely scenario is that PJ Tucker is going to get bought out because I don't think teams are looking at Tucker and saying, okay, we're going to trade a young player and potentially a pick for a player that's averaging 4 points per game and shooting 31% from three and that's playing 30 minutes per game. I just don't see any team realistically looking at that scenario and saying, we're going to give you something of value for Tucker.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if the Rockets were going to trade him, they should have looked into doing it at the start of the season because he's really only hurt his value over the course of this year.